Most people believe drinking water first thing in the morning is simply a good habit, something the body either uses or doesn't, with no real cost to getting it wrong. The truth runs in the opposite direction. At 6 in the morning, your blood is not the same blood it will be at 10. Plasma volume has been quietly falling for 7 hours, and the fluid that thins your blood by midday has not yet arrived. The blood is thickest precisely when the day's cardiovascular risk is highest, and the glass of water you reach for is not hydration, it is dilution, delivered to a system running at its narrowest margin. What you do in the next 10 minutes, whether the water comes before the phone, before the coffee, before anything else, decides whether that margin closes or stays open. The mechanism does not care about intention. Modern life delivers the deficit. The body has been asking, quietly, for the correct sequence. In 1991, a paper in the New England Journal of Medicine traced something researchers had suspected for years but never mapped with this precision. Mahler and colleagues documented a circadian rhythm running beneath the surface of cardiovascular catastrophe, heart attack, sudden cardiac death, and stroke, all clustering in the early morning hours, all riding the same biological tide. Platelet aggregability rose, fibrinolytic activity, the body's capacity to dissolve clots, fell. The blood, in the precise hours after waking, became more willing to clot and less able to undo what it had clotted. This was not behavior. This was physiology, running on a clock no calendar shows you. The lab calls the morning ordinary. The blood does not. The first mechanism is dehydration without a word for it. For 7 to 8 hours, you have taken in nothing, no water, no fluid of any kind, while your body continued working. Respiration exhales water vapor with every breath, hour after hour, unnoticed. Your skin loses fluid continuously. Climate aside, your kidneys spend the night concentrating urine, pulling water from circulation to process what overnight repair generates. Plasma volume, the watery component your blood cells ride in, drops measurably by morning. When plasma falls, the blood that remains is more concentrated. The way coffee left on a warm burner thickens towards syrup as the water cooks away. Hematocrit rises, viscosity rises with it. Platelets, suspended in a smaller volume, collide more often and aggregate more easily. None of this announces itself. The thickening is silent. A laboratory subject deprived of fluid for 8 hours shows measurable hemoconcentration within that single window. A modern adult who skips water and reaches for coffee instead reaches the same thickened endpoint every single morning of an ordinary working life through the identical mechanism, simply by habit rather than by experimental design. The second mechanism is a vessel network running at partial capacity. During sleep, a majority of the capillary beds in resting muscle close, redirecting flow toward organs with no off switch, the brain, the heart, the kidneys working through the night's repair load. The body does not apologize for this. It is triage, not malfunction, a system narrowing its attention to what cannot wait until morning. But a narrowed vascular bed and a thickened bloodstream, arriving at the same hour, do not simply coexist, they compound. The same blood that is harder to move is moving through fewer open channels. The stiffness you feel in your hands and knees on waking is not unrelated to this. It is the visible edge of an invisible constriction, your bloodstream, your capillary bed, the single closed vessel feeding a resting muscle, the narrowed channel meeting blood that has not yet thinned. This is where the morning's two mechanisms first shake hands. The third mechanism is a nervous system tilted toward vigilance before you have opened your eyes. Cortisol rises through the final hours of sleep, peaking near waking, a hormone built for mobilization, not rest. It raises vascular tone. It primes the system for action the way a hand tightens around a tool before the first cut. Layer caffeine onto this state, consumed before water, before any dilution has occurred, and the sympathetic activation compounds atop blood that has not yet recovered its volume. The stimulant does not cause the risk. It arrives at the worst possible hour and asks the system for more. What you are looking at then is not one risk but three converging: concentration, constriction, and vigilance, meeting in a window your body opens every single day, whether or not you understand what is happening inside it. Here is what changes the equation. 400 to 500 milliliters of water, consumed before coffee, before food, before the day's first decision. Plasma volume begins recovering within 15 to 20 minutes. Viscosity drops. The blood that was running thick and thrombogenic starts normalizing at the exact hour the risk window is at its widest. This is not a wellness ritual. It is a dilution event, time to meet the morning's physiology on its own terms. There is a second mechanism the water sets in motion that almost no one names. When the stomach receives a fluid load, gastric distension signals the colon directly. The gastrocolic reflex, a purely mechanical instruction with no hormone required. The bowel movement that so many people try to force with caffeine is more often a reflex water was already positioned to trigger. Caffeine reaches the same destination through a costlier road. Cortisol amplification, cardiac demand, stimulation layered onto blood. The water had not yet been given the chance to thin. This pivot matters more after 55 than it did at 30. The organ you have never seen, never touched and cannot feel, your vascular endothelium, the thin living layer lining every vessel you own, loses the elasticity gradually across decades, and the loss accelerates past midlife. By 60, arterial stiffness has typically increased enough to measurably change how the same morning physiology plays out. Endothelial function, the vessel's capacity to dilate on demand, declines by a meaningful margin across this same window. Insulin sensitivity, which governs how efficiently the body buffers a glucose load, follows its own downward slope after 50, compounding any vascular narrowing already in progress. And mainstream sodium guidance, applied uniformly across age groups without accounting for changing kidney and vascular physiology, can in some older adults blunt the very volume regulation that morning hydration depends on. The advice was built for an average body. The aging body is not running the average program. The tragic irony is precise. The years in which morning dehydration carries the most cardiovascular weight are the same years most people stop paying attention to it at all. Picture a kitchen in a coastal village on Icaria, the kind of place researchers studying longevity have spent decades documenting. Stone walls still cool from the night, a clay jug of water standing by the door before the fire is lit. Mornings that begin slowly by design rather than accident. Population studies of long-lived communities in this region have repeatedly noted unhurried morning rhythms and high baseline hydration as recurring, if understudied, features alongside diet and movement, a sequence so embedded in daily life that no one there would think to call it a protocol at all. Contrast this with a modern weekday: alarm, phone, coffee, door, the entire sequence compressed into minutes, water arriving last, if it arrives before noon at all. An afterthought squeezed into whatever gap the morning leaves behind. The villages were never optimizing for cardiovascular biomarkers. They simply never abandoned a sequence the body had been asking for the whole time, and the gap between that unhurried jug by the door and the commuter mug filled with coffee alone is not a difference in culture. It is a difference in which hour the body's thickest blood meets its first defense. The protocol is not complicated, which is itself worth noticing. 400 to 500 milliliters of room temperature water, consumed before coffee, before screens, before the day's first stimulant of any kind, ideally within the first 10 minutes of waking. This is not about reaching a daily ounce target. It is about timing one dose to land inside the precise window when plasma volume is lowest and clotting risk is highest. Coffee follows, not precedes. By the time caffeine reaches the bloodstream, dilution has already begun, and the cardiac demand caffeine adds lands on a system already correcting itself rather than one still at its daily peak of risk. The sequence costs nothing and asks for no equipment, only the willingness to let the glass come first, before the phone, before the inbox, before the day has a chance to claim the decision for itself. For those managing blood pressure, taking diuretics, or under a physician's care for kidney or cardiac conditions, the same principle holds at a gentler pace, smaller volume, same sequence, same underlying logic, and a conversation with that physician about what volume fits the body in question. Your blood was thickest the moment you opened your eyes. The glass was never about thirst, it was dilution, arriving on schedule into a system that does not measure intention, only sequence, only timing, only whether the water reached the bloodstream before anything else did. Modern life delivers the deficit, what your body has been asking for, quietly, every morning, without ever raising